Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to tackle something, a really common idea about strategic strikes on nuclear facilities. What does success actually look like? Because when you picture, say, an operation against a site with highly enriched uranium, what comes to mind? Probably some, huge toxic leak, right? A big cloud spreading out. Well, get ready to maybe rethink that definition of success quite a bit. We're doing a deep dive today into a really critical technical brief by Dr. Lev Neymotin. Now, Dr. Neymotin, if you haven't heard of him, he's a serious expert, a specialist in nuclear nonproliferation and national security. We're talking over 35 years of experience at the Department of Energy's Brookhaven National Lab. So this is insight grounded in, deep technical knowledge, the real deal.
Absolutely. And what Dr. Neymotin's work highlights right away is this powerful, almost counterintuitive point. When you look at a potential strategic operation, maybe against a facility like Iran's holding that 60% enriched uranium, the main goal is not creating a massive toxic leak. It's not even really about destroying the uranium hexafluoride, the UF₆ itself. No, the real objective, the thing that signals total success, is a complete, irreversible stop to their enrichment capability. That's the prize. And this is just fundamental to understanding it all. If you don't see big UF₆ leaks after an operation, that's actually a sign things went right. It signals success, not failure. Because the strategic goal was met. Look, this isn't just about, delaying them making a weapon for a few months or maybe a year. It's about forcing them to start completely over from scratch. And that's if they're even allowed to start again, right? So it completely reframes how we should be looking at these events.
Wow, okay. That really does flip the script on common assumptions. So if this big visible cloud isn't the main story, what is? To really get what Dr. Neymotin is saying, I guess we need to understand the material itself first, UF₆. Can you kind of break down what uranium hexafluoride is and maybe why people might naturally but maybe wrongly see it as the number one threat?
Yeah, definitely. So UF₆, uranium hexafluoride, that's the chemical compound they use in the gas centrifuges for enriching uranium. And Dr. Neymotin lays this out clearly. When it's just sitting in storage, it's actually a solid. At room temperature, it's condensed. Think of it less like a waiting gas cloud and more like a sensitive solid block. It only gets volatile, meaning it turns directly into a gas sublimits if the temperature gets above about 64 degrees Celsius.
64 C. Okay, so not under normal conditions.
Yeah, right. But here's the part where the danger gets, let's say, commonly misunderstood. The UF₆ itself isn't radioactive in a way that causes immediate widespread harm just from being released. The toxicity, the real danger, happens when it hits moisture, humidity in the air. That triggers a quick chemical reaction. It forms hydrofluoric acid HF, which is nasty stuff, very corrosive and dangerous, and also uranium oxyfluoride. So that's where the toxicity concern comes from. But how it behaves in the real world is key. Normally, it's stored pretty securely in these strong steel cylinders. 30B cylinders are typical just under normal ambient pressure.
Ah, okay. So it's the reaction with humidity that's the hazard, not the UF₆ cloud itself initially. That paints a different picture. Less dramatic, maybe? Now, Dr. Neymotin looks at a specific scenario, right? Hypothetical, but a really important one. What if a facility holding the 60% enriched UF₆ gets bombed directly? Assume no one evacuated beforehand, and it's in hardened storage, maybe underground, but the containment is breached. What then?
Right, the direct hit scenario. And even then, if those cylinders break open, the chemical threat, as you sort of guessed, is actually pretty minimal. Let's think about the chemistry again. Okay, solid UF₆ gets exposed to air. If temperatures get over that 64 C mark, yes, it sublimates into gas. And yes, any moisture in the air will cause that hydrolysis reaction, making the HF and the UO₆. But, and this is absolutely critical from Dr. Neymotin's analysis, it's all about how it disperses in the atmosphere. Because of its molecular weight and how fast it reacts, it just doesn't form these huge lingering clouds people might imagine. Instead, it disperses in pretty small, short-range plumes. Dr. Neymotin estimates, under average weather conditions, the impact radius probably wouldn't go beyond 1 to 2 kilometers.
1 to 2 kilometers, that's it.
That's the estimate. And crucially, the plume breaks up fast, especially if it's out in the open air.
So definitely not like some Hollywood disaster movie scenario with gas spreading for miles and miles.
Exactly. The assessment is that the environmental and health impact is minimal to negligible unless, and this is important, unless you're in a very confined space or maybe an area with extremely high humidity right near ground zero.
Yeah.
And long-term contamination, very localized, really drives home that first point. Worrying about big UF₆s is missing the main event. Their absence is actually good news.
That's such a critical distinction. It really feels like what we think we should look for after something like this is just
wrong.
Yeah.
Based on the actual strategic goals.
Yeah.
So, okay, if we're not supposed to be looking for a massive chemical signature in the air, what should we be looking for? What are the key indicators for this kind of operation, going beyond just atmospheric stuff?
That's the right question. And it leads us to Dr. Nimoten's points about time to surface and detection. Basically, how long might it take to detect anything if it did leak underground? The depth of burial matters a lot here. If it's shallow, say less than 10 meters, you might detect something in hours, maybe up to a day. Medium depth, maybe 10 to 30 meters. You're looking at 1 to 3 days. And if it's buried really deep, over 30 meters, it could take 3 to 7 days for traces to reach the surface, unless there's some kind of vent structure.
Okay, so detection takes time, depending on depth.
Right. But here's the clincher. This is the absolute most critical takeaway from Dr. Nimoten on this point. If, after a few days post-strike, no trace of UF₆ or its byproducts like HF is detected, he concludes one of two things is very likely happening. Either 1, the cylinder stayed intact, no breach, or 2, and this is really significant, the material was successfully moved out before the strike happened, evacuated.
So a lack of detection is either mission success or successful preemption by the target. Both point away from failure.
Precisely. It reinforces that idea. No detected leak is a positive sign. It means either the strike did its job without breaching containment, or the facility anticipated it. And just briefly on monitoring, finding these things isn't technically super hard. Aerial chemical sensors, drones with spectroscopy, they're quite capable of detecting HF and other fluorides if they were released in any significant amount.
This really does shift the whole focus, doesn't it? Away from the immediate, visible aftermath towards the deeper strategic impact. So let's pivot there. If the chemical fallout isn't the main game, what are the real strategic consequences Dr. Nimoten outlines for, say, Iran's enrichment program? This is where that idea of a full stop really comes into play, right?
Yeah.
What's the actual target they're trying to neutralize?
Yes, exactly. And this is where the analysis has, well, enormous implications. Because the true strategic target, the point of extreme vulnerability for Iran, isn't the UF₆ sitting in cylinders. It's the centrifuges themselves, the machines doing the enriching. And these things, they aren't just pipes and motors. They are incredibly precise, incredibly delicate instruments. Think of this. They spin at fantastic speeds, like 50,000 to 70,000 RPM, revolutions per minute, and they need to be balanced with sub-micron precision, a millionth of a meter. It's just an unbelievable level of engineering tolerance.
Sub-micron. Wow. That's hard to even imagine.
Yeah.
So incredibly sensitive then.
Extremely sensitive, which means even minor shock waves, just tremors traveling through the ground or the structure from a successful nearby strike, can throw them off balance or even fracture the rotors. And because they're linked together in cascades, one failure can trigger a chain reaction, a total mess. Dr. Nimoten's specific about the likely damage. Loss of structural alignment, casings warping, internal components just failing completely, across the board.
Okay, so the machines themselves are the weak point.
They're the Achilles heel. So what does that mean for Iran's program after such a strike? Dr. Nimoten's conclusion is pretty stark. It's unambiguous. Iran's enrichment capability post-strike would be effectively zero. Gone.
Not just damage, but zero.
Effectively zero, because restoring it isn't like fixing a car, swapping out a broken part. It would mean completely refabricating all the critical equipment, everything, recalibrating entire facilities, painstakingly rebuilding the whole supply chain for these incredibly precise components. Dr. Nimoten estimates this is basically like building a whole new program from the ground up. It would take several years, and that's even if they could somehow get foreign help with the supply chain, which, would be really, really difficult under sanctions and scrutiny.
Right.
So that makes the full stop argument crystal clear. They wouldn't just be set back, they'd be essentially reset to zero, if they could even start again.
That's a powerful conclusion. And really reassuring in a way. It changes the entire calculus. Okay, so let's just quickly recap what we've really dug into today from Dr. Nimoten's brief. A strategic strike, say on Iran's nuclear sites, the outcome isn't measured by chemical leaks. It actually results in minimal chemical fallout, but maximal strategic damage. That perception of failure, not seeing those huge toxic plumes, it isn't failure at all. It's actually proof of success. Success in achieving a different, much more vital objective, neutralizing their enrichment capability right at the source, bringing it to a dead stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And this deep dive, it really should make you think, how does this shift your perspective on what effective nonproliferation actually looks like? How might this change the way you read news reports now or analyze strategic assessments in the future? When you hear about these kinds of operations, are you still going to be looking for those like dramatic visuals? Or will you understand that the real success is often invisible, measured by what you don't see? The quiet, complete halt of a dangerous program.
And maybe here's a final thought to chew on. If the true measure of success in these super-sensitive, high-stakes situations isn't always about visible destruction, but about a complete, prolonged stop to a capability, well, what other areas might this apply to? Areas of national security or even other big global challenges? Could we benefit from rethinking objectives there too? What might we be missing, by focusing too much on the surface stuff, the easy-to-see indicators, instead of the real deeper impact that might be hidden? Something to think about. We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.